Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Evolving Grid panel. Um, if you've ever wanted to sit around a warm fire and imagine the future of energy storage, I could not imagine a better group than the experts we have today. So I'm going to go in order of last name alphabetically. Our first panelist is a one-man powerhouse of innovation. Not only does he have over 135 patents, he was named one of 5 people who changed the data center industry. Please meet Vice President and Distinguished Engineer at Microsoft, Christian Belady.
Hello.
Welcome, Kristen. Our next speaker has worked in the storage industry from every angle, from wrench-turning engineering roles to high-level analytical leadership. Please welcome Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at Malta, Ben Bollinger. And now, if you consider Imre Juk at DOE on my team to be the godfather of energy storage, our next speaker is the cool uncle who always knows about the hip new restaurants. He joined EPRI in 2002 as an engineer in energy storage and distributed generation, which means anyone working in storage now, myself included, has probably read one of his handbooks or publications. Please meet Director of Energy Storage and Distributed Energy Resources at EPRI, Haresh Kamath.
Hi.
Now, you've heard of gigafactories for batteries. Our next speaker is a real-life giga developer, building thousands of megawatts of clean energy and storage projects throughout the country. Please welcome the CEO of Strategic Management Group, Kelly Sarber.
Good morning, everybody.
Finally, our last speaker is a master of weaving analytical insights and stakeholder concerns to achieve transformational energy goals. If you ever get the chance just to see her presentations, log in and watch how she effortlessly connects people and ideas. Please meet Executive Director of the Long Duration Energy Storage Association in California, Julia Souder.
Morning.
In just a moment, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to identify one barrier that's standing between today and the clean grid vision that Paul Denholm laid out, and how their organizations are working to address that barrier. I'm going to take a minute to talk about what DOE is doing. So as Paul laid out, a decarbonized grid is going to require hundreds, potentially thousands of gigawatts of storage capacity, along with potentially thousands of terawatt hours of storage energy. To put those numbers into context, at the end of 2021, the US had about 8 gigawatts of batteries, mostly lithium, and 22 gigawatts of pumped storage hydro. By 2030, projections suggest about 60 to 70 gigawatts of economically driven batteries are average about 4 hours of duration. And building out the entire pumped storage pipeline would result in about 50 to 60 gigawatts. To get to hundreds of gigawatts and thousands of gigawatt hours, we're going to need new technologies that have much lower materials costs and far fewer siting constraints than pumped storage. As the co-lead for DOE's storage initiatives, I've been helping to encapsulate this challenge into the goals of the long duration storage shot, which we launched last July. We're looking for a few good technologies that have a pathway to the storage shot target, 5 cents a kilowatt hour levelized cost of storage for 10 plus hours of duration. I'll go through some highlights of the steps we are taking to get that goal. The Office of Electricity, the program I lead, is buying down the cost to validate new materials and technologies by building the Grid Storage Launchpad, which you heard about in Undersecretary Richmond's opening. DOE announced or awarded over 200 million in storage-related funding opportunities last year, targeting innovations in everything from fundamental materials to flow battery manufacturing. DOE is also helping communities analyze how storage can help them achieve their energy goals and actually deploy beneficial systems through the new Energy Storage for Social Equity program launched last September. And finally, we're really excited to be working to implement over $500 million in storage-specific programs for demonstrations that were passed in the infrastructure law last year. But DOE is only one part of the solution. The vision of a clean energy future is going to require partnerships throughout the sector. So with that, we're going to turn to our panel question. What is one barrier that's standing between today and the clean grid vision of the future that either Paul laid out or your organization has? And how are you working to address that barrier? So Christian, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm proud to say that, Microsoft, we have very aggressive goals in reaching sustainable energy. By 2025, our operations will be completely on renewable power. By 2030, we are expecting to be having a negative carbon impact. And by 2050, we plan to pay back all of our, I guess, emissions back to the founding of the company. So we really want to do a lot there. However, my team, the advanced development team, is focusing a lot on storage because we think the problem is not just a Microsoft problem. We have to collectively work on this together. The big challenge is the globe at large and not just Microsoft. And so we are investing a lot in storage technologies. We're involved in organizations like the Long Duration Energy Storage Council. We have heavy involvement in other organizations in my own industry, iMasons, where we're trying to drive sustainable industry, the data center industry. And certainly also that organization is sponsoring new technologies and investment in new technologies, particularly around energy storage, being that as more and more organizations heavily rely on renewables, we need to actually have more penetration on the storage side. So definitely a lot of development in that space, and we plan to continue to invest in long duration energy.
Thanks, Christian. Let's go next to Ben.
Yeah, so my company, Malta Inc., is coming at this from the technology developer perspective. And many of the things that we're actually working on to address various different barriers align very well with the 5 tracks that are outlined in the Energy Storage Grand Challenge. So we're working on the technology development side and validating many of the underlying risks for components and other items that go into the system to really drive down any technical risk remaining on those sides. We're working on the manufacturing and supply chain and how that ties in with the cost down efforts and plan for the future for the long duration storage. We're very closely focusing on the technology transition and working to mesh together the OEM guarantees that feed into our plant along with the EPC wrap and how that pieces together in with the off-taker agreements and how those two side to side really enable commercial financeability of early plants with or without additional public or private first of a kind project support. And then all of that very closely ties in with the policy landscape and the valuation of energy storage and long duration energy storage in particular in the various different marketplaces. And then all of those things really tie into the workforce transition and the narrative around how large mechanical and thermal, especially oriented energy storage systems can be built, run, and serviced with the same kind of skilled labor that run today's incumbent power plants. And that really enables those workforces to be preserved and allows them to participate in the clean energy transition. So all of those are various different pieces that fit into the kind of the key challenge that I see, which is putting steel in the ground for first of a kind new technologies at commercial scale and really pulling all the pieces together to make those happen. And I'm proud that Malta's making very good strides on all of those different tracks of efforts in order to make that happen.
Thanks, Ben. Let's go to Haresh.
Right, thank you. This is a really exciting time for energy storage. We've watched this industry grow a great deal over the last 20 years, and longer. But it's really we're reaching kind of a point where we have many technology options that we're looking at for long duration, and we are seeing a certain level of maturity in lithium ion. But we still have challenges in integrating these technologies into the broader grid and making sure that it matches into the planning and operations processes of utilities and the various other entities, ISOs, the regulators, all the other folks out there, and we have to consider those aspects of this of energy storage as well. So really, looking at it from the 3 different perspectives in terms of energy supply and understanding how energy storage fits in with the rest of the energy supply network, trying to understand, from a demand standpoint, what is going to happen with the grid over the next year, next decade, and longer. We're focusing on the grid because we are using the grid to decarbonize the rest of the economy as well. And so we have technologies like electric vehicles and general building electrification. Those types of things are going to impact the way that the grid evolves, and that is going to impact as well how we use energy storage and how that fits in with our planning approach. And then finally, as we try to understand what storage is really capable of, we have to have exactly what Ben talked about a little while ago with workforce transition. Make sure that the utility industry is well aware of what they need to do, not just from a planning standpoint and an operation standpoint, but also maintenance, how we address things like disposal at the end of life, how this all fits in with the circular economy. All important aspects of how we address energy storage going forward.
Thanks, Haresh. Let's go to Kelly.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. So when I look at challenges, you can talk about federal, state, and local challenge. I'll focus on state for a second. There's really no secret why there's so much development of energy storage in California under CAISO's rules and also in ERCOT. It's because those markets value some of the revenue stacks that developers can benefit from, like resource adequacy, voltage or frequency support, backup peak power, et cetera, as well as the transmission, being able to upgrade the transmission without necessarily investing in that transmission using a very well-placed energy storage. So in New York, for example, where I have the largest executed project at 100 megawatts with Con Edison in Queens to build that facility here in the next year or so, what we're looking at is working with the legislature to understand how these markets and how these markets can value better with both NISO, legislature, and the governor's office, and really talking to them about how energy storage is going to be really key for this transition that a lot of these states are trying to make, in particular in New York City, where they have 8,000 megawatts of peak power that's required that they expect to be replaced with offshore wind and some hydro from upstate. So in my case, what we're doing is really working to educate the decision makers there, the stakeholders that are really controlling why private investment wants to flow into certain states, and make sure that they replicate and borrow from other states which have seen a lot of success in terms of development from private investment. I would say also the other thing at the federal level, this lack of the ITC has really been problematic for projects that were executed over the last couple of years. If you look at solar and wind, the reason why those industries achieved parity after 2008, it's because of the ITC and PTC, where we saw kilowatt pricing, at least on solar, drop from 14 cents pre-2008 to 2 cents today. There's no secret why that happened. It's because in a lot of cases, because of the ITC and the PTC that was offered at the federal level. And so really, we've just kind of stuck right now in the water. We don't know if that ITC is going to pass for standalone energy storage. And we're really looking for some of the states to step into that gap and try to recreate sustainable incentive programs that energy storage can take advantage of, so we don't see a falling off in interest in terms of developing these types of assets. So a lot going on with New York Best in the New York market, and then obviously in some of these other markets, Arizona in particular, looking at working with utilities to properly value these assets and to understand why they're so important in terms of this grid resiliency and this transition that we're trying to make today.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And then finally, let's go to Julia.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks again for the opportunity to be here today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And building upon what Kelly was just pointing to, the long duration energy storage in California has 18 plus members representing 11 different types of technologies in the long duration energy storage field, from behind the meter, in front of the meter, local benefits, system-wide benefits. And one of the biggest barriers that we've been trying to address for the last couple of years is, again, the importance in our value add, how long duration energy storage really does provide a diverse set of services. Where we provide both energy and capacity. We can really kind of be part of the solution for ancillary services and really do help the entire grid, and with reliability, resiliency, and just so much more that I think is lost in the conversation. So we've really been trying to promote the partnership and how much long duration energy storage is not just 4-hour batteries, 8-hour batteries, the 10-hour plus, the multi-day, the seasonal, how we can address the dual peaks. So it really is a ton of education outreach that many of the panelists have spoken to before. Again, demonstrating a value add. And we had some great wins this last year working, with the California Public Utilities Commission, receiving 1 gigawatt of procurement for long duration energy storage before 2030. So we're really trying to push the envelope. There are a lot of existing projects that are demos in the state that have been funded by Department of Energy and California Energy Commission, and really proving that long duration energy storage is real, it works, and that we are part of the solution. So we're really excited to see the momentum, and really looking forward to continuing to grow the partnerships of how we're addressing the entire economic transition towards decarbonizing our economy, and how long duration energy storage is essential to making this happen. So it's exciting. It's a lot of work to do, but again, we're really part of the solution and the value add with providing the reliability services and really showing how meeting the resource adequacy components of providing both energy and capacity is essential. So really just trying to fill in the dots of how we are part of the solution. So thanks again for being here. Looking forward to working with all of you.
Great. Thank you all for those insights. Let's start there at the end. Both Kelly and Julia mentioned the need to educate decision makers about what the how storage would be beneficial or a value add. Let's start with Kelly. Is there an argument that resonates particularly well with decision makers, and how would you accelerate this education throughout the rest of the country?
Well, I mean, the idea of resiliency, I think, is something that we talk about a lot because it crosses a lot of the energy sort of discussion around green energy. If we are going to clearly decarbonize away from fossil fuel, we're going to have to find replicable assets that can play in the same manner that natural gas has played over the years in terms of being an immediate response to demand. And batteries are even better because they're on a nanosecond response versus being a day ahead. So I think resiliency is super important, in particular around climate change. Redundancy is super important. Distributed energy is another thing that people are really understanding. Generating the power where you need it so that you're not at risk for not getting power if there's power outages or brownouts like we have in California, where the utilities turn their grids off because of fire danger. So I would say that those seem to be messages that get a lot of traction, and that people that aren't technical or aren't engineers or aren't really seeped in the grid logistics completely understand the importance of that. And I also want to add one thing that Julia talked about on the long duration storage. Really the key thing there is financing. So you need to be able to finance a project. You need a sponsor that's willing to take that risk. And typically you need a partner in the form of utility that wants to see how that asset is going to behave in their grid. And luckily in California, I do have a sponsor. Starwood Energy would love to do a long duration project in California. We're talking to several utilities about teaming up with them to do that, demonstrating how these long duration assets can really help a grid perform, I think, is kind of the next step. And there's always sort of that friction that's created between utilities that are trying to create resiliency and have redundancy and make sure that the grid really operates at the end of the day, and then bringing on some of these new assets and how they're going to play in that within that grid environment. It's very important.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. On that last part about financing, that echoes some of the points that Ben brought up about getting that first of a kind steel in the ground demonstration. And Dr. Richmond did mention, try to highlight many of the capabilities that the national labs have, especially around performance validation. I know a question for Ben: is there a role for the national labs in helping technologies get to the market to reach a 2035 decarbonized grid?
I do think so, and I think there's a lot of work that is already being done there. And thinking about the time frame of the goals, 2035 for decarbonization, that's only 12 and a half years away. And when we look at the sheer quantity of renewables and storage that needs to go on the grid in order to make that happen at bulk, that's going to take 5 or more years to build out the quantities there. And for many utilities that are looking to deploy projects in bulk, they're going to need 3 or more years of operating experience for full-scale demonstration projects in order to get to the comfort level needed to deploy in bulk. So that really means that we need projects in the ground at full scale for these new technologies in 2026, right? And for large 100 megawatt scale commercial projects that take 3 years from notice to proceed to COD, that means we need to close this valley of death now, right? In the next 12 or 15 months, we really need to get these projects kicked off and going. So when we look at the overall risk profile for how all those pieces, fit together, I think, the DOE and the labs focusing more on R&D that addresses implementation challenges and the kind of the underlying remaining few technical risks that feed into piecing together the over financeability structure. Not at the expense of next generation technologies, but in addition to the focus on next generation. I'd say renewed focus on those gap fillers today will really complement well the efforts that the DOE already has going through the bipartisan infrastructure law and through the LPO, and really give kind of 3 legs of a stool to get these new technologies into the ground in the near term, which is what we need in order to hit our 2035 goal.
That sounds really ambitious. I mean, I think 12 to 15 months is a year, and that can be, that kind of time frame can fly by very quickly. As we get more of, so before I go to the next question, I do want to invite the audience to submit questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible, and we welcome any questions you may have about what you've heard or what you might like to hear from our panelists. We talked a little bit about how resilience is a potentially compelling argument for storage, and the architecture for that would potentially invite many more entities like companies, communities, and individuals to participate far more actively in energy asset planning, including investing in energy storage. So a question for Haresh: what kinds of frameworks might be required to ensure that the system continues to operate reliably in this increasingly dynamic environment?
You're absolutely right, Eric. In the future, as has been evolving the last many years, there's going to be a lot more stakeholders involved in developing this kind of a transition. It's not just the utilities or the regulators, but also the communities, also the states, and many other folks who are interested in certain clean energy goals. We're looking at many states or many jurisdictions trying to get to net zero carbon or 100% renewables. That can happen at the state level. In many places, you have community choice aggregators that are trying to do this on an individual basis, and for communities. And so there's a lot of folks out there. What we have to do is make sure that the integrated resource planning approach that we are looking at in the future makes sure to incorporate input from all of these different stakeholders, and make sure that we have the right kinds of approaches to ensuring things we need for grid reliability and resilience. That includes aspects of things like resource adequacy and capacity, and trying to understand the role that energy storage plays into that. And all of those things really mean more than looking at just the technical aspect of energy storage, even from a grid's perspective, but also looking at it from a regulatory and a business perspective, making sure that, one of the things we have to remember is that we have operated the grid for, over a century without a significant amount of energy storage. So there are a lot of folks out there who don't really understand how energy storage fits into planning and operations processes on the grid. We have a good sense of it now, based on a lot of the research that we've done. You heard it in Paul's presentation today, some of the thinking about how it, fits into the future. But we really have to think about it and make sure that the decision makers are educated about the potential here to try to understand how energy storage fits in, not just from a technical standpoint, but also from a business and regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, Eric,
Great.
can I add something?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Haresh is saying. It's going to be participation from everybody involved. For example, we are in some markets, we are using grid interactive UPS. We have many gigawatts of storage in our portfolio for backup systems for, of course, our servers, but they're mostly sitting idle. And so we are absolutely looking at how can we participate as effectively an ancillary service for the grid, which is why we have such an interest, is how can we actually share the costs of this expansion? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And to Haresh's point that, historically everyone's operated separately and hasn't really thought of storage more holistically. And I think companies like Microsoft and others like us are happy to participate in that and help share the costs and the growth, because obviously there's going to be a lot of cost to have this much storage on the grid.
So can I pull on it a little bit, Christian? As I imagine that a company like yours may have traditionally been more of a passive consumer of electricity. Now, how are you thinking about the evolving nature of your relationship to your energy suppliers as you want, potentially become more of a tech engineeringly active participant on the grid?
Oh, well, we want to be partners in the whole thing. There have been situations like in Cheyenne where we've actually, instead of, we're all starting to move away from diesel in general, but back about 5-10 years ago, we actually partnered with the local utility, to pretty much use our generators. When we expanded, our generators is actually part of their capacity planning. Rather than both building capacity, we said, hey, we'll have utility grade generation. So let's see how we can join together and develop this and share the costs in this development, so that it's a win-win situation for the utility, for us, and frankly, the consumers of the electricity. So I think there's lots and lots of opportunity with our industry, but many other industries to look at it more as an ecosystem rather than as individual industries. So we're super excited, and that's why we're here, participating in something this important.
That's fantastic. And I think looking for those win-win opportunities is something that, breaking the traditional assumptions of how the grid operates opens the door to do. So on that note, I'll turn to Julia. What kind of structures can help ensure that everyone can enjoy the benefits of new storage technologies, especially those in potentially traditionally disadvantaged settings?
Thank you, Eric. And building on the theme of inclusivity, I think it's really important that when we're working with partners, we're really expanding what partners mean and looking at community leaders and helping communities really be part of the inclusive planning that Haresh talked about too, is that we really need to kind of not be fearful of bringing in more voices, but if we do this early in the process, then we can have a more robust and supportive project that can really be both a cost benefit to the local groups, and respecting that every group is going to be unique, and really kind of understanding that and learning that from the beginning. I think there are a lot of new tools that both the federal government and state governments are starting to introduce that are very helpful to inform dialogue, whether it's the EPA environmental justice tool, whether it's the California Energy Commission. There's a lot of new maps that you can do with different layers. There's the Enviro screens. There are so many different things to kind of help educate developers and stakeholders to kind of what is possible. I think what also needs to happen is there needs to be more technical capacity building. So a lot more funds from government officials, from and different partners to help improve technical capacity of stakeholders, so that when we are discussing benefit cost ratio or risks or modeling, that we can really kind of have a level playing field. And one last thing I would just like to add too is on the inclusivity. I'm really just trying to say that this is, again, kind of a partnership. This shouldn't be siloed, and showing the connective tissue of how long duration energy storage, short duration energy storage, all these different components kind of play together, both in a local community, behind the meter, in front of the meter, really breaking down what all this means, so that there, again, it's that level playing field where you have that inclusive conversation, that the community feels that they're part of the solution and they want to be involved, and that they see the benefits. Maybe it's tax incentives or other community gains that could be much more creative than what we've traditionally thought. So I feel let's let's really kind of jump into it. We don't have time to be fearful. We really have to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and start moving forward on inclusivity and how important it is to show that there are many different solutions, that if we have the conversations earlier with a diverse group, we can really kind of benefit the grid, the community, and our decarbonization of where we're going. But again, it's just really important to have those inclusive discussions, provide the education, the technical capacity, and really, provide the stepping stones to how we can partner to achieve our goals, because we don't have a lot of time.
I'm going to jump on that. The areas that I'm developing in New York are the Bronx and South Bronx and Queens, Astoria, two of the most high emission areas, very high asthma. The environmental justice community has been incredibly supportive of my projects in both of those areas, primarily because they get the connective tissue between the fact that we can integrate more renewables and that these can become replacement for natural gas plants that are antiquated and have SOx and NOx emissions that are really, unacceptable in that kind of an urban area. And in addition, on our projects, what we're doing and what we're seeing in New York very aggressively pursue is the idea of jobs and connective tissue with the jobs from these facilities, job training, STEM training. So we have actual programs now in Astoria where we're backing up into the community, starting with the elementary kids, showing them how grids work, STEM education, sponsoring STEM education during summer school, and then taking that all the way through to late teenager, college age. We're actually teaching folks how to work in this environment as either electrical engineers or other spaces. So people are really expecting a lot of this investment in the green energy to have equity, inclusivity, and the way that that's going to become a reality is going to be both through working with these communities, having them understand the way that these assets can impact the emissions in their given communities through being able to turn these natural gas plants off, and then showing them that there's connective tissue with the jobs and the investment that's being made in the communities.
Thank you, Kelly. I see some excellent questions from the audience. I think we've touched on things like interconnection considerations and how the grid is evolving with the industry. Unfortunately, we won't have time to get to some other really great questions on the circular economy and recycling. But I see from the head nodding that those are also top of mind for many of the panelists as well. I want to end on a hopeful note. You've heard from almost everyone about the urgency of this situation. And so I want to give our panelists a chance to close, to just speak about what gives you hope that we'll be able to achieve our goals in time. We'll go in the same order. Let's start with Christian.
Yeah, so it's a trick question for me because my hope has waned a little since we passed the tipping point a few years back. However, I'm really hopeful in, panels like this. There's a lot of urgency now that I think has completely changed from 5 years ago. I think everyone's pretty much all in and looking to solve the problem together. So I have absolute hope that we will solve this together as multi-industry, as an ecosystem.
Thanks, Christian. Ben.
I think what gives me hope is that governments and people around the world are really renewing their commitment to decarbonizing the world. I mean, 2021 felt like 3 years in one in terms of how fast long duration energy storage came into the public perception and the vernacular, and how much attention is being paid to this. And I think events like this panel put on by DOE and OE and Berkeley, you really show that there's a lot of smart people who are focusing on the problem and working to make it happen. And I think all the other folks on the panel here, Eric, all the efforts you're doing within DOE, and just the size of the audience really shows that there is an interest and a desire for folks around the world to make this happen.
Thanks, Haresh.
Thank you, Eric. We have often hear that we need to do these things very quick and that we don't have a lot of time. In my experience, the issue has not been that we don't have enough time; it's that we don't have enough attention. The thing that really gives me hope is that there is a lot of attention on this right now. We're not just talking about this from a perspective of a few activists here and there. We're talking about governments and large corporations and utilities and everybody else coming in and saying, hey, you know what? This is not only a huge threat that we have to address right now, but it's also an opportunity. You have basically Microsoft Microsoft here, just as an example, who's here not as a corporation, but essentially as a utility with one customer, and talking about how they're going to address this as part of their energy goals. We have the same kind of discussions from utilities from all around the world who are saying, this is something that's very important. Electrification is something that's very important, a big part of our roadmap. How are we going to address this? The attention that this area is getting now versus even just 2 years ago is phenomenal, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Thanks, Kelly.
Well, I mean, what's been super exciting to me is I'm a project developer. At the end of the day, I develop projects and sites, and I have unlimited amount of sites that are constantly pouring into me through my network, both folks in the wastewater and the waste space, as well as industrial partnerships. That's been amazing. The amount of electric vehicle charging infrastructure that's going to be necessary is really a doubling in some cases of how much energy is being used in these urban areas. And that's probably why we're seeing increasing pricing around lithium ion, is because we're competing for those batteries for EV also. But there's also all these great partnerships that are going to be made where we can learn to better efficiently create energy that's available to everybody in the most efficient manner possible at the places where they need them. And that's really what energy storage does.
Thanks, Kelly. And Julia, get the last word.
I'm really excited that we're moving away from us versus them. We really need to have the creative discussions where we can really shine on the diversity that long duration energy storage and many other projects can provide. And if we have that platform to have those inclusive discussions, then it gives me hope that we're moving in the right direction to start, decarbonizing our grid. So I'm, again, working in partnership, really thrilled to be here with all of you today. And thanks again very much.
Great. Audience, please thank all the panelists for their time. Thank you to our organizers and to our audience. Thanks for being part of the solution. Take care and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.